The next ship. She sailed away without him. Not because she didn't love him, but because in the chaos of 10,000 people running for their lives, she lost him in the crowd. And when she finally turned around, the ship was already moving. Her son was 9 years old, standing alone on a frozen dock. No money, no plan, in one of the most dangerous places on earth. And the last thing she did before disappearing into the fog, the very last thing, was pull the gold locket from her neck and hold it up so he could see it. This is the story of what happened next. Of a boy who survived the unsurvivable, who searched for 16 years, who found his family, only to have his own sister look him in the eyes and say she didn't know who he was, and of what he chose to do anyway. March 15th, 1945. Gdansk Harbor. Before dawn. The temperature was below freezing and had been for weeks. Soviet artillery rumbled 30 kilometers to the east, close enough that you felt it in your chest before you heard it with your ears. Everyone on that dock understood the same thing without saying it out loud. This was the last day. After today, there would be no more ships. After today, there would only be the Red Army, and what came with it. 10,000 people had converged on the harbor since midnight. Not walking, not standing in line, fighting, pushing with everything they had. Old men falling and not getting back up. Mothers holding children above their heads so they wouldn't be crushed. The sound of it, the massed, uncontrolled sound of 10,000 terrified human beings, was something 9-year-old Mark Webber had never heard before, something that had no equivalent anywhere in ordinary life. It was the sound of a world ending, and everyone in it running at the same time. He had his mother's coat in both hands. That was the only rule she'd given him before they left their apartment, before they walked out the door for the last time, past the table where they used to eat dinner, past the window that looked out on the street where he used to play, into whatever came next. Hold my coat, no matter what. Don't let go. His little sister Anna was 5. Elena carried her on one arm and used the other to push through the crowd. Mark gripped the wool of his mother's coat with both fists, his knuckles white, his fingers so numb from the cold that he couldn't tell anymore if he was holding on or just pressing his hands against something that might be there. He didn't loosen his grip. One step, then another. The crowd moved in waves, forward, then sideways, then crushing inward from all directions at once, then surging forward again. Mark was small enough to slip between people, but being small meant the gaps closed behind him instantly, faster than he could compensate. He kept his eyes fixed on the back of his mother's coat, on Anna's small blonde head above her shoulder. If he lost sight of either of those things, he would lose everything. Just the coat. Just keep holding the coat. They'd been fighting through the crowd for 3 hours when they finally got close enough to see the ship. The Baltic Star. Massive, black smoke pouring from her stacks. German soldiers at the gangplank, checking papers, waving people through. The sound of the engines, low, deep, impatient, coming up through the dock planks and into the soles of Mark's feet. 50 feet away, then 40. Then, a sound like a wave breaking. Someone fell ahead of them. A body going down in a crowd that size creates a gap, and a gap in a crowd that size is like a hole in a dam. Everyone surged toward it at once, a wall of human weight slamming forward from behind without warning. Elena stumbled. She grabbed for Anna with both arms, swung sideways to keep her balance. And Mark felt it happen before he could stop it. The coat moving, pulling away from his hands, slipping through fingers that couldn't feel anything anymore, couldn't grip, couldn't close. gone. "Mama!" He screamed it so hard it tore his throat. Tried to grab for her again, but the crowd had already pushed him 3 feet back. Then 5. Then 10. And the people between them had no idea he existed, and did not care. He could still see her. The coat, Anna's blonde hair, his mother's face turning, searching, going white with a fear he'd never seen on her before. Not once in 9 years. Not through any of what the war had already taken from them. "Marek!" Her scream cut through everything else for just 1 second. "Marek, where are you?" "Here, Mama, I'm here." He fought harder than he had ever fought anything. Ducked under arms, squeezed through gaps that sealed behind him before he'd finished passing through them. Used every pound of his 60-pound body against adults who were too large and too desperate to notice a child shoving at their backs. He kept his eyes on that coat, on that blonde head. He did not allow himself to look anywhere else. 10 minutes that felt like the rest of his life. And then, he broke through. Clear space, the gangplank directly in front of him, the soldier checking papers, Anna in his mother's arms, Elena being guided upward toward the ship's deck. 20 feet away. "Mama." She turned. Across 20 feet of frozen dock, their eyes met. He saw everything happen in her face at once. Recognition and joy and horror arriving together. No space between them. No way to have one without the others. He saw her mouth form his name. He saw her try to turn back, try to push against the soldier's grip on her arm. For 1 second, the soldier let her resist. But Anna had started screaming from the sudden movement, and the crowd was pressing from behind like a physical force, and the gangplank was the only direction that didn't end in being crushed. She had 3 seconds. Mark was still running. 15 feet. 10 feet. The gangplank rose. He reached the edge of the dock and stopped. Looked up at the hull, at the hundreds of faces pressed against the railings. Searched desperately for his mother among them. And then, he found her. 3rd deck. Port side. She had Anna pressed against her with one arm. Or, with her other hand, she was pulling something from around her neck. The gold locket. The one she'd worn every day for as long as he could remember. The one with his father's initials on the back. F.W. That he'd traced with his fingernail 100 times when she'd let him hold it. She held it up above the railing, high, so the chain caught the gray morning light, so he could see it clearly from the dock below. Her face was completely steady. "Next ship, Marek." Her voice came over the engines, over the crowd, over everything. "Get on the next ship. Mama will wait in America." He couldn't make words, could only watch. The engines deepened. The hull began to move. Slowly at first, a foot, then 2. Then a gap of black water between the ship and the dock. That went from something crossable to something that wasn't, all in the space of 30 seconds. He watched his mother's face until it was too far away to read. Then he watched her shape at the rail. Then he watched the shape become part of the gray. Then the gray closed over the place where she'd been, and the Baltic Star was gone. And the harbor was just a harbor again, loud and cold and full of strangers. And Mark Weber was 9 years old, and completely alone. He didn't know, standing there on that dock, that he had just seen the final minutes before catastrophe. He didn't know that before another 2 days had passed. The Baltic Star would be at the bottom of the Baltic Sea. A German soldier found him an hour later, still standing exactly where the ship had left him, staring at water. Young face, tired eyes. The face of a boy wearing a soldier's uniform, rather than a soldier wearing a boy's face. He looked down at Mark and asked the only question that mattered. "Was your family on that ship?" Mark nodded. The soldier was quiet for a moment. Something moved in his expression, something private that he didn't explain. "I had a son your age," he said. "Bombing took him 3 months ago." He paused. "Come with me. I'll put you at the front of the next line." He walked Mark through the thinning crowd to a smaller vessel moored farther down the dock. Rust-stained hull. Crude, hand-painted letters. Northern Wind. A cargo ship hastily converted to carry human beings instead of freight. Stripped holds, no bunks, no heat. The soldier checked Mark's papers, handed them back. "Hold on to these. Don't lose them." He looked at Mark for one more moment. The look of a man saying something without saying it. Then he turned and walked back into the crowd and disappeared. Mark never saw him again. He stood in line for 50 minutes. He didn't pray, didn't cry, just stood with his bag and his papers, and the image of his mother's face burned into the inside of his eyes, like something that would never leave. He thought about the locket, about the promise she'd made as she disappeared. Next ship. Mama will wait in America. When they called for boarding, Mark Webber walked up the gangplank of the Northern Wind, without looking back. He had no idea what was already waiting for him in the Baltic Sea ahead. 2 days later, the shouting started at the railing. People surged forward, pointing at the water. Mark pushed through until he could see over the rail. Wreckage. As far as he could see in every direction. Pieces of wood, shattered planking, life preservers. A child's shoe turning slowly in the current. Suitcases split open and trailing clothing through the water. And bodies. Dozens of them. Face down in the black Baltic water, rising and falling with the slow rhythm of the sea, completely indifferent, the way the sea is indifferent to everything it takes. An old man beside Mark was crying without making any sound. "Baltic Star," he said. To no one. To the water. Soviet torpedo. Most of them drowned. A Swedish vessel picked up some survivors, took them to Stockholm. The Baltic Star. Mark stared at the wreckage moving past the hull of the Northern Wind. A life preserver drifted close enough that he could read the letters painted on it. BALTICSTAR. His mother had been on that ship. Anna had been on that ship. He turned from the railing and was sick over the side. Kept going long after there was nothing left. Around him, other refugees watched with pity and looked away. There was nothing to say. Everyone on that ship had their own version of the same story. He wiped his mouth, turned back to face the water. "Some survivors," the old man had said. "Some. Not most. Not many. Some." Mark stood at that railing for the rest of the day, watching the debris thin out and finally disappear, not eating, not speaking, running the only calculation that mattered over and over, arriving at no answer. He did not know if his mother was alive. He did not know if his sister was alive. Unknown was worse than any answer. Even the worst answer gave you something to stand on. Unknown was just falling. But here is what Mark could not have known. Standing at that railing with his hands gripping the cold iron and his eyes on the water. His mother was alive. She was on a lifeboat somewhere behind him in the gray Baltic distance. 20 people crammed into a vessel meant for 12. The sea coming in cold over the sides. The Baltic Star already gone beneath the surface. Anna was pressed against her chest under her coat. Elena's arms were locked around her daughter, and she had not moved them since the torpedo hit, and she was not going to move them. She was alive, and in the part of her mind that wasn't occupied with staying alive, with keeping Anna warm, with watching the horizon for any shape that might be a ship, she was thinking about her son, about the dock, about his face getting smaller as the ship pulled away. The northern wind reached Copenhagen 3 days later. British authorities transferred the refugees south to Hamburg, a massive displaced persons camp. Thousands of people in barracks that had been built fast and not well. Bulletin boards covered in names. The same question being asked in German and Polish and Russian, and a dozen other languages, by people whose faces all wore the same expression. Have you seen my family? Mark asked every day about the Baltic Star survivor lists. For every day the answer was the same. Nothing yet? Check back tomorrow. He checked back every day for 3 months. In June, Hans and Greta Schmidt came to the barracks, a German couple from Munich. Their home had been bombed. The children they'd spent years trying to have had never arrived. They walked the rows of cots until Greta stopped. A boy was sitting alone on a cot, writing in a notebook. Hans approached quietly. "What are you writing?" The boy looked up, brown eyes that belonged to someone considerably older than 9. "A diary, so I don't forget." "Forget what?" A pause. "Everything. My mother, my sister, the dock, the way it looked when the ship pulled away." Hans sat on the edge of the cot. Greta knelt so she was at eye level with the boy. "What's your name?" "Mark Weber." "Mark, we've been looking for a child who needs a home. We have one to offer, if you'll have us." Mark studied them carefully, the way a child who has been alone in the world studies adults who offer things, with equal amounts of hope and wariness. "My mother is alive," he said. "She might be in Sweden or America. I don't know yet. But she's alive." He said it like a fact, like something he had decided. "I need to find her." "Then we'll help you find her," Hans said. "We promise." They kept that promise for 15 years. Hans wrote hundreds of letters, to the Red Cross in Geneva, to Swedish refugee authorities, to the U.S. Immigration Service, to every organization that might hold a piece of the answer. Most letters went unanswered. The ones that came back said the same thing in different languages. "Records incomplete, system overwhelmed, we're sorry. Please be patient." Mark was not patient, but he learned to wait, which is a different thing. In Stockholm, Elena was sending the same letters and receiving the same non-answers. She and Anna had survived. A Swedish merchant vessel had reached their lifeboat. 7 hours after the Baltic Star went down, 58 people pulled from the water, 142 who weren't. Elena and Anna were among the 58. By February 1947, they were on a ship to New York, standing at the railing as the Statue of Liberty grew larger against the winter sky. Anna tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Is Marek here, Mama?" Elena's eyes filled with tears. "If he's alive," she said, "this is where he'll find us." She kept that belief alive for 16 years. Fed it every morning, like something that needed tending to survive. In 1960, Mark was 24. He had a job with a construction firm in Munich. A wife named Helga, patient and steady, who understood without being told that she had married a man carrying something large and unresolved. A daughter born in 1959, named Greta after the woman who had fed him and kept him warm, and helped him search without ever once making him feel that he owed her anything for it. In the spring of 1960, Hans Schmidt had a heart attack and died at 62. At the funeral, Greta took Mark's hands. She was 73, and she looked it, and she held his hands the way she'd been holding them since he was 9 years old. "Hans left you money," she said. "Life insurance. Use it." Hire a professional, someone who does this, who knows where to look. Find them, Marek, or find out what happened. You deserve to know. Either way, you deserve to know. 1 month later, Mark sat across from Klaus Meyer, a private investigator who had spent 20 years finding people the war had scattered across Europe and America. The walls of his office were covered in maps. His desk was buried in files. Mark put a piece of paper on top of the files. 2 names: Elena Weber. Anna Weber, last known location: Baltic Sea, March 1945. I don't care how long it takes, he said. I don't care what it costs. Klaus Meyer looked at him for a moment. If they're alive, he said, I'll find them. What neither of them knew, what Mark had spent 16 years not knowing, was that Elena and Anna were not in Sweden, not in Germany, not somewhere across an ocean that needed crossing. They were in the same city he was about to fly to. They had been there since 1947. But what awaited Mark when he finally found them was nothing like the reunion he had spent 16 years imagining. 8 months later, Klaus called. Both alive, both in New York. A pause, measured. Your mother lives in Queens, works as a housekeeper, lives modestly. Another pause. Your sister married 5 months ago, a wealthy investment banker, Upper East Side. They live in a brownstone mansion. Mark sat with the phone against his ear and did not speak. 16 years. Alive. New York. When do you want to see them? Klaus asked. Tomorrow, Mark said. I want to see them tomorrow. He flew out the next morning. The taxi from JFK took him to Queens first, to his mother's address, to the building he'd been picturing in the abstract for 16 years and was now seeing in the concrete. In the gray November afternoon light, ordinary brick and fire escapes, and a street that looked like 10,000 other streets in New York. He climbed the stairs to apartment 3B, stood in front of the door. He had imagined this moment more times than he could count. In the barracks in Hamburg, in the Schmitz apartment in Munich, on trains and planes, in the half-awake space just before sleep, every night for 16 years. He had built and rebuilt this scene, what he would say, what she would say, how it would feel when the door opened. He knocked. Footsteps, a lock turning. The door opened. And there was his mother. 48 years old, gray threaded through hair she'd pulled back simply, deep lines on her face, the lines of hard work and hard years, and the particular kind of grief that doesn't show up all at once, but accumulates quietly over a very long time. A plain house dress, hands that had been working before she answered the door. But her eyes, still the same eyes, exactly the same. The thing that doesn't age, because it isn't made of anything that age can touch. She looked at him with the polite attention of someone opening the door to a stranger. Yes? Can I help you? Mark said 2 words. In German, the language of every prayer he'd ever said since he was 9. Mama, ich bin es. Mama, it's me. She went completely still. Her eyes moved over his face, slowly, with the terrified attention of someone who has been wrong about this before, who has seen faces in crowds that turned out to be strangers, who has learned at great cost not to let hope make decisions, before the mind has had time to catch up. She looked at his eyes, at the line of his jaw that was his father's jaw, at the boy she had last seen standing on a frozen dock, with his hand still raised to wave, getting smaller as the ship moved away. Marek? She whispered. Yeah, Mama. For 3 seconds, she didn't move. Then something broke open. Not in a loud way, not dramatically. The way a dam doesn't announce itself when it gives way. It simply goes, and then everything that was held back is moving. She made a sound that was not a word and not a cry, something that had been waiting 16 years to exist in the open air. She lunged forward, grabbed him, pulled him inside, her hands moving from his face to his shoulders to his face again, checking. The way you check something you cannot yet believe is real, over and over, because each check brings you one step closer to being certain. He was real. He was here. Mein Gott, du lebst, mein Junge, mein Marek. My God, you're alive, my boy, my Marek. She was shaking. He could feel it through both his arms as he held her, the deep, involuntary trembling of a body that has been bracing against something for 16 years and has just been told it can stop. He held her in the doorway of apartment 3B in Queens, New York, in November of 1961. And he let her shake. And he didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say that the holding didn't already say better. After a while, she made tea. Her hands were still unsteady, and she had to concentrate on the cup. She kept looking at him across the small kitchen table. The way you look at something you're afraid will disappear if you look away. Quick, checking glances, reassuring herself. He told her everything. The northern wind, standing at the railing watching wreckage drift past. Hamburg. Always the Schmitz. 15 years of letters. The private investigator. The 8 months of waiting for an answer. She told him everything too. The torpedo. The sound of it. Anna in her arms in the lifeboat. The cold water coming in over the sides. The 7 hours before the Swedish ship arrived. Stockholm. New York. The letters she'd sent for years that came back with nothing. I kept my promise, she said. Her voice was steady now, with the steadiness of someone who has found solid ground after a very long time without it. Mama will wait in America. I came here. I waited. I know, he said. I found you. He stayed until midnight. They talked the way people talk when they have 16 years to cover and can't stop, because stopping feels like losing time they've already lost. Finally, he looked at her. Where's Anna? The detective said she got married, that she lives in Manhattan. Something shifted in Elena's face. Not a closing, more the look of someone choosing their words carefully, because the words matter. Yes, she married a man named Jonathan Blackwood, June of this year. A pause. Investment banker. Old money. That's wonderful. She's happy? A silence that lasted just a beat too long. Anna is ashamed of me, Marek. Her voice was quiet, completely level. The voice of someone who has said this to herself many times and arrived somewhere past the worst of it. Of being poor, of being German, of being a refugee, of everything we were before. She folded her hands on the table. I wasn't invited to her wedding. Mark looked at her. Her husband didn't want me there. I would embarrass them, he said. And Anna agreed. She looked at her hands. I understand why. I don't like it, but I understand it. She was 5 years old when it all happened. She built a new life. She needed to put the old one somewhere she couldn't see it. I want to see her, Mark said. Marek, she's my sister. Elena looked at him for a long time. The little girl you're looking for. The one from the ship. She's spent 20 years trying to bury her. Be prepared for who you might find instead. The next morning, Mark took a taxi to the Upper East Side. He stood outside a brownstone mansion, black iron gates, white stone steps, window boxes with winter plants, and thought about a 5-year-old girl on the deck of a ship, her small hand reaching back through the cold air toward a dock she was moving away from. He rang the bell. A butler answered. "I'm looking for Anna Blackwood. She was Anna Weber. I'm her brother." The butler's expression was professionally unreadable. "One moment, please." The door closed. Mark stood on the steps. His heart was doing something he couldn't quite manage. He had handled difficult things in his life. He had a long education in handling difficult things. But standing here, outside this door, he felt 9 years old in a way he hadn't felt in years. 10 minutes passed. The door opened, and there was his sister. 21 years old, beautiful in the particular way that comes from working very hard at being beautiful. The clothes, the hair, the pearls at her ears. The careful assembly of someone who has decided exactly who she wants to be seen as, and has executed it with precision. 6 months pregnant. For 1 second, just one, just a flash, he saw the little girl from the ship, in the shape of her face, in the gray eyes, which were their father's eyes, which time had not changed at all. Their eyes met. And for one terrible, wonderful moment, she knew exactly who he was. He could see it move across her face like weather, the recognition arriving before she could stop it, her lips parting, her eyes going suddenly bright and wet. Something old and true, pushing up through 20 years of careful construction. "Marek?" she whispered. In German, the language she'd spent years erasing from herself, coming back in one word, unbidden, from somewhere below everything she'd built on top of it. "Ja," he said quietly. "Es bin ich. Ich habe dich gesucht. 16 Jahre. Yes, it's me. I've been looking for you. 16 years. She took a step toward him. Her hand lifted slightly, an unconscious movement, reaching without deciding to reach. The muscle memory of a 5-year-old girl on a ship's deck, reaching back toward a dock. "Anna." The voice came from behind her. Not loud. It didn't need to be loud. It had a quality that didn't need volume, to land with full weight. Jonathan Blackwood appeared at his wife's shoulder, tall, handsome in the cold way of men who know it. He took in Mark with a single glance. The suit that was decent but not expensive. The accent. The particular story that the whole of him told. And his expression settled into something that had already decided. "Anna's brother died in the war." "I didn't die," Mark said evenly. "I was separated from my family at Gdansk harbor in March of 1945. I got on a different ship. I've been in Germany. I've spent 16 years. You've spent 16 years reading about my family in the newspapers." Jonathan's voice was smooth and unhurried. "And you've constructed a very compelling story. I'll give you that. But compelling stories from strangers appearing at the doors of wealthy families have a reliable pattern, and this fits it. Jonathan," Anna's voice was uncertain, trying to find a foothold. "Think carefully, Anna. You were 5 years old. Do you actually remember what your brother looked like?" "I remember his eyes." "Brown eyes," said flatly, like an answer to something. Mark looked at Anna, not at Jonathan, only at Anna. "On the ship," he said quietly. "You were crying. You reached your hand back toward the dock. The ship was the Baltic Star. It was torpedoed 2 days after you sailed. You and Mama were rescued by a Swedish merchant vessel. You stayed in Stockholm until February 1947. He paused. Let that settle. "The locket. Mama took it off on the dock before she boarded. Your father's initials, F.W. She held it up above the railing so I could see it from below. She wanted me to know she was still carrying him, still carrying all of us. Anna went completely still. Nobody else knew about the locket. She had never spoken of it. Not to Jonathan, not to anyone. It was the one image she had kept from that morning as something entirely her own. Her mother's hand above the railing, the gold chain catching the gray light, the initials she had traced with her fingertip 1,000 times, as a child in Stockholm. Her hand came up again, one step toward him. Anna. Jonathan's hand closed over her shoulder. Not violent, just immovable. You're 6 months pregnant. You're emotional. This man has done his research, and he is using that against you right now. But the locket is documented in refugee records, accessible to anyone who knew where to look. His voice gentled slightly, the shift from certainty to something that sounded like concern, but moved in the same direction certainty had been moving. I know you want this to be real. I understand why. But wanting something to be true doesn't make it true. Mark watched it happen. Watched the doubt move in like weather, slowly, filling the space that Jonathan's voice had opened. Watched her look at her husband's face, certain and composed, and then back at Mark's face, which could offer nothing as solid as certainty. Could only offer truth, which looked shakier from the outside than it felt from the inside. He understood it. He didn't want to, but he understood it. She had built everything she was from nothing, from the girl with the wrong accent, and the second-hand clothes, and the mother who cleaned other people's houses. Jonathan was the proof that she had succeeded. And Mark, standing at her door, was the past she had worked 20 years to leave behind. He was not just her brother. He was everything she was afraid of becoming again. I don't know what to believe, Anna whispered. Jonathan called for security. The guard appeared and took Mark's arm. Mark didn't resist. He looked at his sister, only at his sister, and he spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. I'm not angry. I need you to know that. I understand what you're afraid of. But I am your brother, and I have been looking for you since 1945. And whatever you decide to do right now, that doesn't change what's true. Anna stood at the top of the steps. Her whole body was rigid with the effort of something. The guard's grip tightened. And Anna looked at her husband. And then she looked at her own hands. And then she looked at Mark one last time. And he could see it, in the very last moment before the door closed. The thing she was choosing to bury. The thing she had recognized, and was deciding, consciously and at great cost, to deny. I'm sorry, she said, barely audible. I can't. The door closed. Mark stood on the sidewalk in the November cold. The guard walked back inside. The street was quiet and ordinary, going about its business. He stood there for a long time. Then he found a payphone 2 blocks away. He put a coin in. Dialed. She answered on the second ring. Mama, he said. She denied me. Her husband convinced her I was lying. They had security escort me out. The silence on the other end had weight to it. Come home, Elena said. He took the subway to Queens. She opened the door before he'd finished knocking, pulled him inside, held him without saying anything, the way she'd held him on the dock in Gdansk, except that now she didn't have to let go. After a while, he pulled back, looked at her. I want to take care of you, he said. I have money, a business. You don't have to work like this anymore. He paused. Anna has made her choice. I understand it, even if it hurts. But I'm not losing you again. Not ever again. Elena looked at her son, at the 9-year-old boy who had gotten on the next ship, who had grown into this man standing in her kitchen. And she nodded once. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay." Neither of them knew what was coming. Neither of them knew that 9 years from this night, Jonathan Blackwood's empire would collapse, that the mansion would be foreclosed, that Anna would find herself standing on her mother's doorstep in Queens, with 2 suitcases and 2 daughters, and nowhere left to go. And that when Elena opened the door, Anna would discover something that would break her open, in a way nothing else had managed to do. 9 years passed. Mark flew to New York every 3 months, sometimes more often. He paid Elena's rent ahead, bought her furniture that was comfortable, and dishes that weren't chipped, and made sure she could quit the jobs that were wearing her down. They cooked together in the evenings, talked for hours, making up lost time the only way you can. Slowly, conversation by conversation, ordinary moment by ordinary moment. He brought Helga and their daughter Greta one summer, and then their son Franz the summer after. And Elena held her grandchildren and cried, with a completeness that suggested she was crying for everything at once, for the joy of it, and for all the years before it. They never told Anna. Anna's life, in those same 9 years, was quietly coming apart. Jonathan had always been controlling. But as his investments started failing, bad bets, leveraged positions that the market didn't cooperate with, an SEC investigation that his lawyers managed, but that cost him things money couldn't fully replace. The certainty curdled into something else. He needed someone to blame. Anna was available. "You're lucky I married you. If it weren't for me, you'd be cleaning houses like your mother. You brought nothing into this marriage. Nothing." He wasn't wrong about the nothing. She had brought nothing. That was what she had been running from. But she had brought herself, the girl who had survived a torpedoed ship, and a refugee camp, and a strange country, and built something from zero. And he had taken that, and made it into an insult so many times that she had nearly stopped being able to see it as anything else. By 1969, the firm was bankrupt. By 1970, the mansion was gone. Jonathan walked away from the marriage and left Anna with what she'd brought into it. 2 daughters, Emily, 8, and Sarah, 6. No money, no support, no safety net of any kind. Except one. The one she'd been pretending for 10 years didn't exist. On a hot July evening in 1970, Anna stood outside a building in Queens. She hadn't been inside in over 5 years. 2 suitcases, 2 daughters who didn't understand why they'd left the only home they'd known. She looked at the building for a long time. Then she went inside. 3rd floor, apartment 3B. She knocked. Elena opened the door, looked at Anna, looked at the 2 girls, looked at the suitcases, read the whole story in 5 seconds, without needing a word of it spoken. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't say, "You didn't come to my door for 5 years and now you're here." She didn't say, "You chose him over me." She just looked at her daughter's face. "Mama," Anna said, in German. First time she'd spoken it in years. It came out rough, from disuse, like a door opened after a long time. "Kann ich nach Hause kommen? Can I come home?" Elena stepped back from the door. "Natürlich, Liebling. Immer." "Of course, darling. Always." 2 weeks passed, then 3. Slowly, Anna started noticing things. She'd been too numb to notice at first. The apartment was nice. Really nice. New furniture, not expensive, but good. A proper kitchen, well stocked. A television. Clean paint on the walls. The kind of apartment that said, someone takes care of this place and has the means to do it. Too much means for a housekeeper's salary. She found the bank statements in a kitchen drawer, looking for something else. Monthly deposits. Regular, substantial, going back years. From an account in Munich. M. Schmidt. When Elena came home that evening, Anna was sitting at the kitchen table with the statements in front of her. Who is M. Schmidt? Elena sat down across from her. She was quiet for a moment. Then, Mark Schmidt, your brother. The room tilted. My brother is alive. He came to New York 9 years ago. He found me. Anna sat very still, the math arranging itself in her head without her permission. 9 years ago, 1961, right after the wedding. November 1961. The man at the door, the worn suit, the brown eyes that had looked familiar, in a way she'd refused to follow to its conclusion. The way Jonathan had said, con artist, before she'd had time to decide for herself what she thought. The locket. She had given herself Jonathan's explanation for the locket. Refugee records, research, someone who knew where to look. She had chosen to believe it, because the alternative required a cost she hadn't been willing to pay. That was really him, she said, not a question. Yes. And I had him thrown out. Elena said nothing. He's been taking care of you, while She stopped, looked at the bank statements on the table, at the months and years of deposits, at the record of a brother doing from the other side of the ocean what she should have been doing from 20 minutes away. He's been being the child I wasn't. He's a good man. Does he hate me? No. He should. That's not who he is. That night she wrote for 3 hours. She wrote about the dock, about the way she still sometimes woke in the night, with her hand outstretched, reaching for something she couldn't name when she was awake. She wrote about Jonathan, and what she'd chosen, and what it had cost her. She wrote about the moment on the steps in November 1961, when her hand had started to rise toward her brother's face, and she had pulled it back. She wrote, I knew it was you. I want you to know that. I knew it was you, and I chose not to. I was a coward. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'm asking anyway, not for my sake. For the little girl who screamed your name from the deck of that ship. She's still in here. She never stopped knowing who you were. The letter reached Munich 3 weeks later. Mark read it at the kitchen table, read it again, set it down. Helga sat across from him and waited. What will you do? She asked. He drove to see Greta Schmidt. She was 83 now, smaller and slower. But her eyes were the same as they'd always been. The eyes of a woman who had made up her mind about what mattered, and had never needed to revisit the decision. He showed her the letter. She read it slowly, without expression, set it on the table between them. You know what Hans used to say, she said. He said the bravest thing a person can do isn't surviving hard things. It's going back to the people you hurt and asking them to let you try again. She looked at Mark. We chose you when you had nothing and no one. You built something real from that. Maybe Anna deserves the same chance. What if she's not different? What if she hurts Mama again? Then you protect Elena. But you won't know until you give her the chance to show you. Greta was quiet for a moment. That's what love does, Marek. It doesn't wait until it's sure. It goes back anyway. Mark booked a flight for the following week. He arrived at Elena's apartment in the evening. Elena opened the door and stepped aside without speaking. The apartment was quiet. The girls were asleep. Anna was sitting at the kitchen table. 30 years old. No pearls, No expensive clothes. A simple dress, hair pulled back, hands folded in front of her. The elegant assembly of November 1961 entirely gone. What remained was just a woman at a table, with nowhere left to hide behind. She stood when he came in. They looked at each other across the kitchen, both of them carrying 16 years of a different version of the same story. Then Anna crossed the room and stopped in front of her brother. "Ich bin so leid," she said, in German, the language that kept coming back, that she kept thinking she'd left behind, that apparently had not finished with her yet. For the door, for all of it, for choosing the wrong thing over and over, when you were right there. Mark looked at his sister, not the 5-year-old on the ship, or not the 21-year-old on the steps, the 30-year-old woman who had lost everything she'd tried to build in place of what she'd had, and had made her way back here, to this kitchen, to this table, with nothing left to offer except the truth of what she was. "I forgive you, dear," he said. "I forgive you." Her face broke. "Why?" "After what I did." "Because you're my sister," he said, simply, like it was the simplest thing. "Because I spent 16 years looking for you. Because I got on the next ship and I kept going. And I am not going to lose you again, not for any reason." She came apart entirely then. He held her the way you hold someone when the years between you collapse all at once, and there's nothing left but the original thing. The thing that was there on the dock in 1945. The thing that had been true through all of it, underneath all of it, no matter what had been built on top. Elena stood in the doorway, watching her 2 children, together, in her kitchen, after everything. The family rebuilt itself, not the same as before the dock. That family was gone. It had been gone since March 15th, 1945, and no amount of love was going to bring it back exactly as it was. But something else grew in its place. Something that knew, in its bones, what it had cost. Something that held on with a specific grip of people who have learned what letting go feels like. Mark helped Anna find an apartment in Queens, paid her daughter's school fees, watched her work her way back to herself, year by year. She visited Elena every week, called every few days, became the daughter she should always have been, and did it without fanfare, because she understood that she had no credit to spend on gestures, only on showing up. In 1975, Anna remarried, a teacher named Daniel, a man who had no interest in what she'd been before, only in who she was, and who loved her for exactly that, not despite the past, because of who the past had made her. The family grew. Mark flew in from Munich every summer, with Helga and Greta and Franz. Elena's apartment became a problem of space rather than silence. Elena Weber died in March 1995, 82 years old, her own bed, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who filled the apartment and spilled into the hallway. The gold locket was on the nightstand beside her, the one with FW on the back, the one she'd held above a ship's railing in the gray dawn of March 15th, 1945, so a 9-year-old boy on a dock below could see it. She had worn it every day for 50 years. She had never taken it off again after that morning. At the funeral, Anna spoke first. She stood at the front of the room and looked out at the faces of her mother's family, at the life that had grown from a woman who had refused, through everything, to stop waiting. "My mother survived a torpedo in the Baltic Sea," she said. "She survived a refugee camp. She survived building a life from zero, in a country whose language she had to learn word by word. She survived being poor and tired and far from everything she'd known." She paused. And she survived me, which was, I think, the hardest part. She taught me something it took me 20 years too long to learn. That forgiveness isn't something you give when you're ready. It's something you give, because the alternative is spending your life with your hand on a door that could be open. Then Mark stood up. He looked out at all of them, at Anna, at their children, at the great-grandchildren who were young enough that the story of the dock was already history to them, something that had happened to other people in another world. My mother made a promise on a dock in Gdansk in March of 1945, he said. She was being pushed up a gangplank in a crowd of 10,000 people, and her son was on the wrong side of it, and she pulled her locket off her neck and held it up above the railing, and she said, "Get on the next ship. Mama will wait in America." She waded through a torpedo and a lifeboat, and 7 hours in the Baltic Sea in winter. She waded through refugee camps and a strange country and a language she didn't know. She waded through 16 years of letters that came back unanswered. She waded through the years when waiting seemed like the most irrational thing a person could do. He looked at the locket on the table beside the flowers. And when I finally found her, the first thing she did was make tea with shaking hands and ask me to tell her everything. He stopped, started again. That's what love does. It doesn't count the years. It doesn't ask what took so long. It makes the tea, and it says, "Sit down. Tell me everything. I've been waiting." She waited, and we found our way home. Some stories are about survival. Some are about loss. The best ones, the ones that stay with you, are about the people who never stopped believing you were coming back. Even when the ships went down, even when doors were closed in your face, even when 16 years stretched on, and the world moved forward and gave you every reason to stop. They kept the light on. They made the tea. They waited. Mark Webber was 9 years old on a frozen dock in March of 1945, when his mother told him to get on the next ship. He spent the rest of his life understanding what she actually meant. She didn't mean, take the next boat. She meant, keep going. Whatever happens, keep going. Find your way back to the people you love. And when you find them, forgive what needs forgiving. Let go of what needs letting go. And hold on to what was always true. That's what she did. It's what he did. It's the only thing, in the end, that any of us can do. Get on the next ship and find your way home.